Hello, I'm Mike Buchanan, leader of the political party Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them. I'm also the conference director. Um, your host today, because I'm hopefully going to say very little, and I don't want to get into an argument with her, is the lovely Sally Ann Burris, who's a member herself of Gender Parity UK, a very impressive group of I don't know whether they call themselves activists or MRAs. I suspect both, and hopefully anti-feminists as well. Sally, a very warm welcome. And I know we already have our first question, so if you want to launch away.
Do you want to introduce just 30 seconds of each person?
I'm sorry, Sally.
Okay?
Thank you very much.
Because these guys are very rich in background.
Yeah.
They used to do 1 minute intro, so 30 seconds.
No, that's fine. No, it's nice to have a professional as a co-host. Yes, I just ask, some of you I know were in the Gender Parity UK video, but most of you weren't. So if you could just in 30 seconds briefly say, briefly give your name, who you are, what it is you do, and then we can get into the questions. Mike, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Mike Bell, and I joined up with Philip. He started Gender Parity UK, called something else at the time, and I've been along nearly all the time and have been secretary for a while. Also, in the last 12 months, I've started the all-party parliamentary group on issues affecting men and boys, and having quite fun. Thank you.
Philip?
Yeah, Philip Tanser. I'm the founder of Gender Parity UK and trying to steer the boat a little bit, but in the last, I would say, half a year or so, it started steering itself, which is brilliant because that means I have to do less work on my own, and a lot of additional information about me obviously you can see in the interview that I did yesterday. As soon as that is online, people can watch that.
Okay, thank you. Greg?
Hi, my name is Greg Cavadino. I'm a chartered accountant, consultant with financial services industries. I got a phone call from Philip Tanser just over a year ago. So to join Gender Parity with some of the work that I've been doing on family court and parental alienation and domestic abuse and all of those lovely things that, you know, adversely impact predominantly males, but also children.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Terry?
Hi, I'm Terry White. I joined Gender Parity maybe a year, 18 months ago, primarily to meet and get the take advantage of the additional resources and mindset of people who are involved in the space. My special interest is in maintaining the best result for children coming through family court and ensuring that the laws that are put in place have an equal effect to men and women alike.
Okay, thank you. David?
Yeah, my name's David Eggins. I mainly work for a small charity, Temper Domestic Violence, delivering work with people with abusive behaviours, both males and females, which is really quite controversial, even very controversial. Joined up with Gender Parity probably about 18 months to 2 years ago as a way of looking to develop how I'll continue to volunteer when I'm too old, which is now, to go on delivering the face-to-face work with people.
Thank you, David. Rex?
Hi, I'm Rex Bourne. I work freelance interviewing for Health Education England. I'm the chair of two charities. One is the 422 Foundation, and the one that we're focusing on today is Parity. Similar name, but slightly different objectives. We campaign for equal rights for UK men and women, and to protect existing rights.
Thank you, Rex. Okay, Mike, do you want to do this, or do you want me to ask this question?
No, just before we carry on, one of the things that you may or may not be aware of is that anybody who speaks at this conference or is a panelist is entitled to a complimentary ticket. So if you haven't already got a ticket, if you email me, I'll make sure you got that, and you'll have access to all the conference materials for the next 6 months.
Lovely. Thank you, Mike. So we've got a question from Steve Moxon. I'll read it out and then we'll have a look. I think our chair, Philip, has already decided the two guys who may be suitable to answer that for you. But do you know crowd-funded legal challenges might be fruitful in terms of the forthcoming incitement to hatred, re-sex, which is not specifically to females? The Law Commission proposed this instead of making misogyny or both this and misandry a hate crime domain, as they know government would be in an impossible position re its discrimination against males. But in fact, they've still dropped this clangor. Now, I think you are right. Terry's done a huge amount of work on this. He's kind of almost our specialist, I think, with the amount of stuff he's done. So do you want to answer, Terry?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be, if it does, I mean, I wouldn't call myself an expert and I haven't read it through as well as I could have done, but certainly the indication that incitement to hatred will be actionable. It's going to be very interesting in some of its outcomes, especially to groups such as Women's Aid and Refuge, and it might be worthwhile taking some, and Safe Lives, it might be worthwhile taking some time to go through these organisations' publications in the public domain and extracting where we believe they have undertaken incitement to hatred of men. It certainly was interesting in that Law Commission report to see the statement by Women's Aid that they actually would rather have not had this provision at all than for it to apply to both men and women, which gives you an indication that their awareness of the dangers for their own organisation, where incitement to hatred of men could actually be actionable as an offence. Greg, do you have much to add?
I think the terms, misogyny and misandry just need to be kind of abolished and just have a single sex discrimination, which is, something that we're all trying to strive towards. I think crowd-funded legal challenges is something that we've looked at in the past, or I've looked at in the past with some other groups. And where there is a case that has the potential to be groundbreaking, I think that should, we should be putting that in the public domain to get that crowd-funded. We just need one case to get over the line, and then the floodgates open, and that happens in in commercial law, in contract law, but it doesn't seem to happen when it comes to gender-based law.
Well, the funding, the funding is completely disproportionate. Women's Aid, as an organisation, has an extraordinary amount of money, but it doesn't necessarily need to be done as a private law action. There might be a means of getting the institutions to undertake their actions against Women's Aid. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is Mr. Moxon online?
He's an attendee.
He's an attendee. See you.
Yeah.
I could always. It's up to Sally, but we can always promote attendees to panelists if that would help, and obviously with their agreement.
Yeah, Steve, did you have anything more to add on that? I'm looking at the chat to see if you'd be typing up. Or
Steve, put in the chat that you'd be happy to join as a panelist, and we'll put you up if need be. So, okay, just waiting for that. He's obviously gonna he has to go around his flat with a Hoover now, so it's presentable.
So does everybody know exactly what gender parity does? Would it help if somebody actually looked at the history of the work that we've been working on?
Actually, I wanted to address Land Ray has put a question into the chat room.
Okay.
The US has an established history of case law extending the protections of the 14th Amendment to sex-based measures of discrimination. Does the UK have any equivalent? Now, that's a pretty technical question that requires knowledge of two jurisdictions. And I don't think any of us are in a position to give you a definitive answer on either of those. But you'd have to remind me, or unless someone here knows what the 14th Amendment is. Equal protection. Equal protection under the law. We have we don't have a written constitution in the UK, so it's a different type of law. We have acts of parliament that can be changed in the future, but we do have an Equalities Act, which has certain protected characteristics. There's probably about 9 of them from memory, and one of them is sex. And sorry?
I said, unfortunately, it allows for gender-based discrimination in the Equalities Act.
Yeah.
Well, yes, if there is a particular need for it, but so it would be operating slightly differently to the way it would work in the US. So we do have an equivalent. We do actually have legislative action to require public institutions to be following equality, or rather not to discriminate on sex unless it's required. Mike?
I just wanted to get back to what we've been doing on gender parity. I thought it might be interesting just to say what we did on the hate crime consultation.
I think so. This is what I was, because it'll give a background of the work that we do within the group.
So what happened was about 12 months ago, the Law Commission published a consultation document, and one of the sections of it wanted to make misogyny a hate crime. And when we looked at it, and Philip Tanzer went through this thing with a tooth comb, we realized that the section on sex and gender was a postmodernist construct. That is, they started out with their conclusion and then picked some evidence which supported it. That is, their conclusion was that violence against women by men was motivated by hate, and then they simply used the statistics about violence against women to prove their point, which of course it doesn't, because we know that. So we put in quite a substantial submission, and 12 months later, we find that the Law Commission has in fact recommended that misogyny should not become a hate crime, and they quote us 5 times in their report. They also quote the Men and Boys Coalition, who obviously also put in a submission, as did Mankind. I think what this shows is if you put the effort in, a lot of people actually are listening, even if you think that they're not. I mean, I'm not saying this is a fantastically amazing achievement and we've changed the world, but we have changed something.
Yeah. May I add that sometimes we are surprised how few submissions there are being made. For example, in regards to the domestic abuse bill, in the second submission, there were quite a few men-focused organizations that submitted. But the first time around, there were very few submissions, if I remember correctly. And I think it really helps if every organization that believes in gender equality or that is male-focused writes submissions every single time there is an act or a bill in process.
I think that's a very good point, Philip. I think when the domestic abuse bill came out, the organisations like Women's Aid and Refuge, they've got obviously quite a large population and a big email distribution list. And they went, there was a call to action from those organisations. And I think there was about 1,400 submissions from female groups, and there was only 200 odd from male groups. So it's having that kind of chain of action or call to action to get people involved and get them to submit their information. And that's
I'd just like to say a couple of words on this. As somebody who's spent a long time in providing submissions to select committees, you can get burned out. I mean, I think on one occasion I spent 2 weeks preparing something, so I've done that on domestic violence, suicide, a few other things, and I think we need to be sympathetic when people kind of think, oh my God, I just, Mike, sorry, go on.
Well, I think the point there is that this is why we meet every week on gender parity, because, we all just feel sometimes that we've had enough. And then we meet up on our little Zoom call and have a bit of a laugh and hear what other people have said. And we just go away a bit more energized. We did have to do some work at the beginning to make sure, that people come along with a whole lot of negative vibes and and make us feel worse. And we had to work out how not to do that. But we haven't been doing that for probably 15 months. We haven't had people undermining the energy of the group. So
No,
I think the other point is that Philip said that on the second time round, I think when the domestic abuse bill came to the Commons, there were far more pro-male submissions. Well, part of the reason was we contacted a lot of people saying, please put in a submission. I'm not saying that was the total effect, but I mean, at least we did something. And
okay, Philip, thank you, Mike.
And I would like to add to that, often people that are very engaged, like Rick Bradford, the guys from Mankind, we kind of do the same work, where we can really support each other and we can communicate and say, have you already done this work? And then you can write a submission that uses different words but uses the same research. And I think, Mike, you're completely right. It is often quite daunting to read through these legal texts, and not everybody has the time. And that's why in Gender Parity UK it works so well. Terry and Greg, they're incredibly good at just reading through texts and analyzing them immediately, but then they still need support, or they want to their analysis to be double checked, and then that's when we guys are coming in. Last time, as Mike Bell said, with the hate crime law, I read through the whole thing, but it took me a week. It took me 1 or 2 weeks to actually do that, and not everybody has the time. That's why sharing responsibilities is so important in the men's movement.
No, I think you have a model that's working very well. Steve Moxon says, I reckon it needs full-on confrontation, firm legal threats. Forget being nice, lay it out starkly, and make sure they know we mean legal business.
What I think to that is that what we need is everything. That you need to play good cop, bad cop on it. And you know, I remember thinking this in the Green movement in the 80s. Is you got the hunt saboteurs or Greenpeace activists, you know, with their zodiacs or in front of the whales and what have you, and then they get a lot of publicity, but they can't actually. Everybody says, "Oh, how ridiculous!" But then somebody else talks to the minister. You know what I mean? So I think that everything that people do, unless it's destructive, is worth doing. And what we're doing is the quiet thing. We're saying, hello, Minister, have you noticed that there's this bias in the paper? For instance, one of the things we did was we wrote to the chair of the Law Commission and said, have you noticed the postmodernist bias in this document, which is being published under your name? Now, I have no idea whether that was effective, but I think it's highly likely that the chairman didn't know what was in this publication because some other committee did it. And similarly, we can contact MPs and say, you know, have you noticed, rather than you dreadful person, why haven't you? I think almost anything goes.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that, Mike. I think that's a very good point. It's like to me, the men's rights movement is a bit of a jigsaw, and people find their places in it. So some people are good at this quiet, under the radar influencing, which I'm not. But equally, you know, I can do some stuff that people who are good at that influencing are not good at the stuff that I kind of have some success with. And I think one of the strengths of the men's rights movement is that we don't say it's my way or the highway. And I think that really works well.
There was Land said, how do you keep your group focused and cohesive to act over and over again? And I think that was quite an important question to answer. I mean, we've been working on this for quite a long time now, and we found a format that worked for us. I don't want anybody to underestimate the volume of work that's put into this, because it isn't. I mean, our identity is a think tank. So anything that's released, documentation that comes out, we you know, these guys monitor press releases. They any consultation progresses. They're signed up to different sites and they monitor those sites. They bring that to the table. we have a documented, very streamlined, easy way of looking at that every single week. But the volume of work, so they will create letters, for example, that we publish or we send out on mailing lists and we share them, we ask people to share them. They're designed to help people to pick things up, look at it, say, okay, I agree with this, and then to pass this information on in their own format. So I don't want to underestimate, these guys do a massive amount of work. But what they do is they target. So each week we've got one document we can complete every week. We review it, we work through it. These guys feed into it, they finish it, they sign it off, they move on, and it's everything they do is relevant. And the whole concept is to share that data and to see whether it makes a difference. And they work really, they're underselling what they do, because I know the work they put into it. And I mean, it's incredible. So I think it's about lightly being organised, but never swaying from that. Philip is an amazing chair. He keeps us all in check and he keeps us all on point for the minute. So it's about who's going to take that role within the group. We discuss it, we shift with it when we need to. Sorry, go on, Philip.
Yeah, I wanted great answer. Thank you very much. I wanted to add something to that, because it's also about the structure. When we first started, I mean, I was the driving force, but then we had Mike Bell coming in, and he provided a structure in how we should interact with each other, and we created certain interaction rules, so to speak. And then Mike obviously worked as a chair for a very long time. Now Terry is our chair. And
Secretary.
Sorry, yeah, secretary. Thank you very much for correcting me. And then we have now a new kid on the block, so to speak, and his job is to just chase us up with emails and say, have you done your job? Because every week we have an agenda with action points, and somebody reminds us if we have done the action points, and that really helps as well. Terry, you are muted.
Yeah, just in response to Lan's question, he was saying that that he's getting small groups together. Well, let me try and scroll this up a bit.
Yeah,
I've been successful gathering small groups to take action on specific legislative issues, but those groups tend to dissolve at the next legislative session. And that sounds to me that he might be, and correct me if I'm wrong, he might be looking at the legislation when it comes out and sort of petitioning about the legislation and working that through whether it's constitutionally viable within the US context. What we tend to do is we tend to try and act at the pre-legislative stage. So, for instance, our submission for the Law Commission was part of the review. Our submission to the Domestic Abuse Act was in the pre-legislative consultation. We don't tend to take action, if I understand the meaning of that term correctly, which would be a legal action. We tend not to take action on legislation once it's been passed. So it might be easier to maintain a sense of constantly lobbying and putting a point forward into the legislative process, rather than feeling that you've got this big event legal action to undertake. But I could have misunderstood your email.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one of the very early functions which went on was the storming, forming and norming. And I think a lot of problems with groups are you've got to get through the storming bit. And I'm not at all sure whether the storming bit is not best done face-to-face with face-to-face contact rather than remotely on Zoom and on telephone calls. And so I think that was quite a help in the early stages of this process.
I think there's another interesting point is that we probably wouldn't have done it without lockdown. But somehow lockdown gave us the impetus to say, well, we're going to be at home anyway, so we're going to do it on Zoom. You know, certainly my experience of previous groups, you know, meant that I was quite firm in the idea that we needed to know when we've made a decision and know who was going to take the action and have some way of checking it. And that's how we ended up with our action table at the moment. So which is described in our video. And I think it's essential to keep some sense of knowing what the decision is, who's going to do it, and then at least vaguely following up to see whether you did it, because we all forget.
Yeah. I think just on the point from Ray about successful gathering of small groups, I know this is something that I've encountered in my kind of tenure in working with different groups, and it's almost like there needs some kind of federation to bring some of these groups together and some of these skill sets, because there's a lot of people that are working very, very hard individually and as part of small groups to make change, you know, whether it's on the family court or whatever arena that might be. And I think having a platform specifically for, you know, men and boys to bring some of these groups together under one umbrella and, you know, exploit that skill that people have got. And I don't think we've got that necessarily in the men's movement. I think the women's groups are very, very good at doing that. But I think specifically around men's legislation, I don't think, you know, I think there's a few years worth of work to do to bring people together into that kind of federation format.
There is the issue, of course, Greg, sorry, there is the issue, of course, that one thing that helps these feminist groups is millions of pounds worth of income every year. that helps, you know, whereas the men's movement will probably always be run on a shoestring.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's a lot of people doing pro bono, and you used that word before, and, you know, the men's movement is pretty much done on a shoestring budget or pro bono, and we are up against, you know, a £500 million industry in the UK of marketeers, of PR experts, and that is effectively what's driving the propaganda. And, you know, we are up against that machine to, you know, with no funding, but very committed individuals. And what's become apparent in my 5-6 years being involved in this, very intelligent people, because there's a lot of people, specifically men, getting, you know, ridiculed and shafted by a system that's there to protect.
Mike?
One of the things that we noticed early on is that the whole anti-male narrative is supported by a series of myths. And at one stage we did start to put together some refutation of these myths. And although the anti-male people have got an enormous amount of money, their argument relies entirely on creating myths and perpetuating them. So they repeat things like toxic masculinity, or you know, I can't think of off the top of my head, but there's these set piece statements that they make. For instance, you know, that women had to struggle against men's opposition for the vote. Well, these are just falsehoods. And although we don't have much money, we don't have to actually, it's not like having an argument between two people who have a different opinion. The anti-male narrative is constructed on myths, and all we have to do is state the facts. So actually, it's very strength. You know, we've got far more strength because we only have to state the facts.
Can I just, sorry, I'd just like to pick you up on that. The men's rights movement has been stating the facts and using rational arguments and statistics for at least 50 years. That collectively, that hasn't amounted to a hill of beans. And we need to understand. We need to understand it's not. This is not a battle between truth and lies. The lies win every time.
I think
if the lies are big enough.
Yeah, I think there's something about having to shift and change your perspective and pick up that energy and move forward. Some of the tasks we did, like Mike was talking about, you know, we cracked open urban myths. That very action, we published on it, but that sealed our group as well, because it contributed to the direction of where we wanted to go. So I think the journey is just as equal, and when people are watching you, it establishes us. Steve Moxon said, but won't the law re-incitement to hatred, re-sex itself, facilitate legal action against other law? So this might be a question again for Greg and Terry.
Could I say something real quick in regards to the myths and the lies? The thing is, lies have to be perpetuated. Truth is self-evident. That's why the media, certain activists and politician activists have to repeat these lies over and over and over again. they have been doing it for a very long time, and maybe they will succeed for another couple of decades. But at one point, I think the structure might collapse and the truth will come through. And I do think that we are preparing that, or we are keeping at least the truth alive. And I don't expect to win, but I'm very happy to fight. And by the way, Steve Moxon, he's been incredibly active all through the conference, and he's in every Q&A. And I would like to reach my hand out to you, Steve. Maybe you want to get in touch with us and join us in a conversation at one point.
Okay.
Other facts which are changing very much are 4.7% of domestic violence used to be recognized as being by women. It's now gone beyond 35%. And consequently, then male victims are moving more and more towards an equal number with females. It's been a very intense week also with, or last 10 days, with 3 cases where women have been held to be responsible for the deaths of children. And of course, in round figures, 50% of the deaths of children are attributable to women. So
it's actually more. It's actually rather more than. It's rather more than that, David. It's a majority.
Quite possibly, yeah, yeah.
I just wanted to try and put an answer to Mr. Moxon's question, which was, can the incitement to hatred law be used against other laws? Which I think he means, can it be used to strike down another law? Quite likely that that won't necessarily be possible. But certainly the implementation of other laws by the civil servants, you should be able to have some sort of action on. But the principle of parliamentary sovereignty would mean that if there's a clash, they'll probably go with the most recent law. And it's difficult to see how a law itself could necessarily incite hatred. We can already see, however, that in the Law Commission report on hate crime, how the effect that the Equality Act was able to control the construction of the bills that are being put forward, even though they would technically each be equal under the principle of parliamentary sovereignty, and it's quite possible for Parliament to pass a law that would breach the Equalities Act. They're unwilling to do it because of the impact that would have on the effectiveness of the Equalities Act generally. So yes, it can be used softly to control other law, but you wouldn't be able to quash other law, I would suggest. Yeah,
I would find it actually quite interesting to challenge education or educational standards like gender studies or certain trainings in the workplace that are so gendered that they might perpetuate or incite hatred. And right now, John DeSantis, the governor of Florida, he put a law in place, if I'm not correct, that actively attacks the woke. And with this law, if I understand correctly, parents can sue the school if the school teaches critical race theory, and employees can sue their companies if the company forces them to attend certain trainings. And maybe a law that makes incitement of hatred illegal, maybe that could be used to challenge education rather than legislation.
Yeah, I'll add to that there is already law relating to incitement to hatred, and in the UK or in England, and what the Law Commission's suggested bill will do is extend that law to cover the category of sex. But currently that law already exists in relation to race, and we can see how that existing law was able to short circuit critical race theory teaching in England and Wales, with what was said in Parliament, that this would be illegal. She was actually referring, I believe, to that particular law that it would be incitement to hatred. So I think that's it's quite useful piece of legislation to use in that private context in controlling how the institutions operate.
Sorry.
I think we need to remember it's not even a bill yet. It was just a Law Commission report, if I'm right. And there are civil servants whose job is to make sure that laws don't contradict each other. So I think we should at least wait and see when the draft legislation comes.
There is a number of countries withdrawing from the Istanbul Convention, preparing for that. And some of the reasons they give is that the convention is inciting hate between families and competition within the community. So I think there's reference to that in one of the reasons why it's withdrawing. So I think sometimes narrative is quite significant. Is that when people are using the same terms in reference to legislation, there's a significance in that. I know Italy has made statements about it, Poland's made statements about it, all referring to the breakdown of the family. So I think, and hate within the family and the community, competitive within the gender and the sexes. So I think sometimes it's significant. We've got some more questions in the chat, if you give me 1 second. The next one is from Sean. You've been responding to feminists' insertion, like the misogyny hate crime thing, that most people knew nothing about. In a world where misinformation is everywhere, where do you go for reliable information on current developments? So that's kind of open because all of these gentlemen have their own sources and the ways of bringing it to the table. So who would like to make Rex? You're on mute, Rex.
So what happens is what we find is that there are channels for consultation in all sorts of things. That is, it's not hidden. You don't necessarily find out about it, but we've done things like set up alerts on they work for you and things like that. And just through the network, we kind of find out, for instance, we knew about the first draft of the Law Commission's hate crime thing, but we only saw in the newspaper that the government decided not to go ahead with misogyny as a hate crime. But actually, I was then sent the latest version by Mark Brooks, but we wouldn't have known about it, even though we contributed, unless he had told us. So again, I think it's the sort of networking effect. But what we do find is that, as we were saying on previous things, it's possible to access all sorts of things, like select committees or consultations, and in general, people aren't doing it. So we find it relatively straightforward to do.
I mean, one of the ways just recently we've been looking at the APPG groups. Who's supporting, what are they doing, what's their subject matter? These are sources of information. To some degree, they can be pre-discussion, because if they're successful in what they're doing, they then become a subject matter list in central government. You can sign up on, the Scottish government site. You can sign up to be notified every single time a consultation comes out.
Yeah.
So there's lots of methods, to be able to source that data.
I've got to search every time something comes up on the Istanbul Convention. I get an email.
Yeah.
I would like to say that when something significant is happening, we try to connect to other organizations. Mike mentioned Mark Brooks from Mankind, for example, and this is a great disappointment to me, and I know that this disappointment is reflected by some others, and I do not like to like expose other organizations, but I'm so incredibly disappointed in the so-called Man and Boys Coalition, because they are supposedly a coalition, but they're not doing their job. And I know your view on that, Mike Buchanan, and I would say that I mirror this view. But even, okay, so they have feminists in their ranks. I could live with that, but what I cannot live with is the fact that they don't actually connect organizations and rally men's organizations together to for example, write to the domestic abuse bill. That should be their job, but unfortunately, small organizations like us have to take on this mantle, and that is quite frustrating because we are quite limited in what we can do. Luckily, Sally made a collection of all organizations that work with men and boys or that are focused on gender equality. So she made this huge list of organizations, and in the future, we would like to send emails out to them to highlight certain things. Is that correct, Sally?
Yeah, it is. We did a mapping exercise across the whole of the UK, in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England, to get all of the organisations that we could find that were attempting to serve men and boys, and that's the network. So the idea is to share all this data and invite them to contribute or join us in some things that are really important. So we're always ongoing, you know, there's always movement. There's always the future movements. Sorry, Greg.
No, that's just to elaborate on that reliable information. I mean, you look at some of the freedom of information requests that are on there. I think, like Mike said, with what do you know, Hansard is also a rich source of data. I think the other one as well is signing up for some of the kind of feminist groups. So being on the Women's Aid newsletters and refuge newsletters, they are very, very good at publicising anything that is against men, and they put that in their newsletters. And you know, they send their newsletters out a few times a week sometimes, or their communications. So you can pick up something very, very quickly. And, you know, I think that Mike said, a quick Google search and you found your information. But I think, you know, having, you know, one of my subject matters is parental alienation. And just having that on a Google search, you know, that crops up in my inbox, and there can be sometimes 5 links or 15 links, depending on what's prevalent in the news. But I think keeping abreast of what's going on is crucial, because you can take your eye off the ball quite quickly with some of these subjects, and they can mushroom very, very quickly in a matter of days.
But I think there is another question here, is like, how can someone who's got who's busy on a variety of things, how can they get an easy news source that they don't actually have to double check? And once upon a time, we could have had faith in the BBC for that. And, unfortunately, the charter isn't being honoured, and so every little piece of news that you actually want to get to the bottom of, you've got to do a tremendous amount of your own research. Yeah. And I do wonder. I've been recently impressed with the Morning Wire by Daily Wire in the US, and I think that a service similar to that has a potential here, and maybe we should be writing into our friends Ben Shapiro or something, and seeing whether he wouldn't mind considering doing something similar in the UK, because it's a service I think that's needed.
Yeah, there's been a big growth in podcasts as well over the last few years on these subjects, and I think that's got a lot of people talking. Whereas before, you know, it was Twitter, it was Facebook, whereas now we've got sessions like this, which has been invaluable for a lot of people to dip in and dip out of, because it's live communication. You know, it's not old, it's not something that's happened a few weeks ago. We're talking about stuff like this now, and I think there is a leverage there for a channel or a podcast medium to get some of these issues out and about.
But Greg,
sorry.
But Greg, you just mentioned Twitter. I still find that Twitter is a great source for news stories, and I think that our fellow MRAs that are still very active on Twitter, I think they're crucial in some of the, well, not the research, but they highlight news stories and they come up in my feed, and that's how I find some of the stuff. So you really have to use all these different platforms.
Yeah.
And yeah, I also have to say, we were trying to reach out to news websites, like, for example, GB News. We tried to get in touch with Trigonometry. and the New Culture Forum. Unfortunately, it's very, very hard to get in contact with these news outlets that I think do amazing work, but it's very difficult to reach out to them and get in contact. Luckily, I was approached by the Lotus Eaters, and now I got the chance to sometimes write articles for the Lotus Eaters, which is amazing, which is great. But I wish that we could at least get a little bit in contact with GB News. They would be the best news outlet for us, and I hope that they grow as a company, and I hope that they look at good research, and I hope that they will invest money into good journalism, because that's what we really need at the moment.
I'd just like to chip in very quickly about GB News. GB News, I do not see them ever criticizing feminism and feminists, or giving any platform to MRAs. They have one of their one of their people is Gloria De Piero, who was the Labour Labour shadow minister for women and equalities. There's a woman on there by the name of Alex is her first name, who occasionally comes out with some interesting stuff.
Yeah.
But other than that, I mean, of course, I mean, he's not there now, but Andrew Neil started this off, and he's chairman of the Spectator Group, which also, at least in the UK, the Spectator is absolutely it repeats feminist lies all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think on that point about getting stuff into the mainstream, I know this is quite an odd statement to make, but Loose Women for International Men's Day had a panel of men on there, and the feedback on that was very, very positive. And you know, if someone was to approach ITV and say, well, let's do this once a month, you're getting buy-in from females as well as males, and I think that's a bit of an untapped audience potentially.
Yeah, I think it's an issue. I think it's a question of a show rather than a broadcasting outlet.
Yeah. But I think getting some of these issues debated, like they're very much like, I mean, I don't really watch Loose Women, let's be clear, but having some of the debates that they had on International Men's Day was quite thought-provoking. And I know that's only a once a year kind of show. I know someone there's just mentioned about Julia Hartley Brewer in the chat, and again, you know, she does some great work with, you know, publishing some of this stuff on radio and television and all of that lovely stuff. But it's finding these people to support some of these initiatives that we're doing, and doing it frequently, not once a year, which is what, you know, International Men's Day is about. But getting something out there far more regularly, weekly, would be an ideal medium.
They also, over time, very quickly, they also over time tend to get cool on the men's rights movement. So Julia Hartley Brewer is a great example. I've been interviewed by a number of times since about 2013, but not much in recent years. And now when issues are raised, she would certainly not call herself a feminist, but she equally knows MRA arguments and just doesn't put them. So
yeah,
it's, you know, because I mean, you know, it's like Philip Davies says, why would they put their heads above the parapet? They see what happens to me, and they don't want that.
Yeah, and Alex at GB News did that. I think she did a news article in the last few months on men's rights, and the next day, whether she was paid to do it, but she kind of contradicted a report the previous day. So, you know, it is quite a brave subject for people to talk about, but talk about frequently and with passion without getting shot down.
So we've got literally 5 minutes left. If there's any questions anybody would like to ask, can you put them in the chat as quickly as possible?
In the Q&A, Sally.
Yeah, sorry, in the Q&A.
Yeah.
Rex, can I ask you just to say a little bit about your Parity work, just so that you could do a little bit about the background of that, just for a minute?
Yeah, by all means. I mean, you probably think I've been quiet, but I've been mentally participating in all the discussions and listening and learning. Parity is, our organisation is possibly a bit narrower than some of the other bodies, but this is something we're hoping to reboot in 2022 because you know, we go right back to equal pension rights for men and women, and bus passes and things like this. In other words, just trying leveling up, in the words of Boris. Whereas now we're aligning much more closely with the work that the gentleman here and yourself and other organisations, and also Mike as well, because we just feel that we've got left a bit behind, and we really want to get more involved in things that are very much issues of the day. And domestic violence is very much one that we're focusing on, and also boys' education, and the fact that they seem to be disadvantaged. You know, as a school governor of 36 years vintage, I've looked at a lot of data over time, and it's amazing. Right from primary years, the boys run so far behind, and I just don't remember that when I was younger, but now it seems to be very much the case. It's almost as if they shrug their shoulders and give up. So that's something we're certainly following up on.
And I will recommend Will Nolan's on that. He's speaking on Saturday, I think.
Thanks, Terry. Yeah.
Terry, I'm a little bit envious that you get to be the co-host.
Yeah, I'm really pleased with that. But the problem is, of course, that there's going to be so many questions for him coming in from the public. I'm not going to get any more my own questions in without, you know, sidelining the guests.
I suspect that might just get the most the most questions, the most attendees. We're hoping to get Sargon right at the end. So the bearded gentleman at the bottom here is going to try and do that. It would be awesome to end the conference with an hour with Sargon. So
I sent him an email. Once I'm home, I can see if he replied.
Okay, look forward to that.
Can I give a shout out for Tom, please? Tom, I know you're listening because you get to every single one of these. Tom continues to provide all the background editing and everything. He's asking for his back check. I can't answer the back check comment, Tom, but we do think you are king at what you do, so please don't feel disheartened. And we know you're serving there well.
He's done all the video work on the conferences since 2016, so that's all but the first one.
Mike, I've got a quick question for Philip Tanzer. Philip, where are you?
He's in prison.
I'm reimagining the famous lie of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, where she was standing at the fence pretending to look at the migrant children.
No, I think that isn't that the fence to keep the English out.
Well,
can I just say one?
Sorry, Sally. I'm gonna have to wrap it up. Yes, just echoing your point about Tom. Yes, he's an absolute star. He sometimes complains about the money, but you know, since 2016, every year we've doubled his salary, and yet he still whines about how he's not recognised enough. But no, amazing man.
He's great.
There are very few people in the men's rights movement who work harder, or who I admire more. And these virtual conferences, he does the videos on he's an amazing man. So thank you, Tom. Definitely one of the unsung heroes of the global men's rights movement, as far as I'm concerned. I'd just like to say thank you all very much for coming to this this Q&A. You've got a great thing going in Gender Parity UK. I know it's taken a lot of time and effort and sweat and blood and all the rest of it, but it's very impressive. And I hope you go from strength to strength.
Actually, it's a real pleasure, and working with people with such different backgrounds and such amazing talents is spectacular. And I would recommend for every group to try to find people that have different talents, because each one of us has a different character, different talents, and I think that's why we work so well together.
Okay, thank you, Philip. I'm gonna have to end it there. I don't want to mute you. So a particular thanks to Sally, Philip, and Terry for each doing 2 days of co-hosting. I mean, that's going really, really well. Thank you so much for that. And we shall be back tomorrow. Sally and I started with an interview at Q&A at 7 o'clock this morning. So I think we're both off gonna, I expect Sally's gonna have a cup of tea. I might not have a cup of tea, I might have something else. Anyway, it's good, goodbye for everybody, and I literally have to end this now. Bye for now.
Have a lovely evening.
Thank you very much for letting me be involved. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye.